Ethan's birthday cake, with its defiant, bleeding red velvet, was barely half-eaten when the email landed in his inbox. The subject line screamed, "Happy birthday, Ethan." Then, in mock innocence, "Thought you'd be interested to see what we're building here. App. Our launch press release. Copy." And the coup de grace, attached was a list of investors he used to love name-dropping before he even met them. But let me rewind a bit, because for you to understand how a startup born in my garage became his public torture, you need to see the live broadcast of this murder. It all started with a handshake that wasn't a friendly gesture, but a snapping jaw of a bear trap. 16 months ago, I walked into Ethan's company, convinced I was strapped into a rocket seat headed for the tech world stars. How wrong I was. It wasn't a rocket. It was a gilded hamster wheel, spinning so fast you burned to a crisp. Shiny enough to blind your friends and make them jealous. On day one, Ethan dropped a phrase that lodged in my throat like a chunk of rancid beef. With a grin that sent shivers down my spine, he said, "You're not here to create. You're here to win." His eyes gleamed, and I knew, this wasn't just a job, it was war. And by win, he didn't mean building revolutionary products or capturing markets. No, his win was surviving this coliseum of gaslighting, where credit was pilfered left and right, and the cult of productivity reached absurd heights. Every morning began with a soul-crushing meeting where no one dared to look up. We cowered like guilty criminals while Ethan, like a bloodhound, sniffed out who had dared to forget to log their tickets in Jira. His words were like a sentence. To be the boss is to suffer in silence, and your weekends are my personal runway. I once witnessed him mercilessly delete an entire week's worth of a designer's work, simply because the font didn't strike him as assertive enough. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he made her apologize to the entire team for his own tantrum. But I didn't break. Not yet. I was playing my own game, long and calculated. While others wept in dark stairwell corners or chained themselves to the loading dock in despair, I methodically documented every single thing, timestamps, screenshots, audio recordings, assembling my digital arsenal of humiliation. Not for HR, of course. HR was his loyal cousin. No, this was for me, for the future, when my hour would come. That Thursday arrived. The clock read 6:47 p.m., and most of the team had already scattered like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Ethan, like a cornered animal, pinned me against the cold server room wall, reeking of acrid onion vape and a torrent of disjointed words. His gaze burned through me. "Are you loyal to me?" I held his gaze, careful not to betray a single emotion. "I'm committed to the cause, Ethan." He loomed over me like a shadow. "For life?" I smirked inwardly, cringing. "Ethan, I'll do whatever it takes to get the job done." A ghastly smile bloomed on his face, the kind you give a condemned man just strapped to the rails. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Cody, our lead backend developer's termination notice." He circled it with a red marker, as if signing a death warrant. Leaning close to my ear, he hissed, "Guess what I wrote in the corner?" My eyes darted to the indicated spot. Scrawled in large, menacing letters was, "No1 quits me." I didn't flinch. Not a twitch. I simply absorbed the words like poison, letting them settle deep in my spine, where revenge brews and sharpens. "You're taking Cody's place," he declared, as if bestowing upon me the greatest of favors. No raise. Just the honor. I nodded silently, stepped back, and walked out of the server room without a word. That very night, I dialed Cody's number. The first question I asked him wasn't about how he was feeling. No. I asked, "Do you want to build something that this son of a bitch will never recover from?" A brief pause hung in the air, then a response brimming with anticipation, "I thought you'd never ask." And so, the first death knell for Ethan was rung. Instead of a business plan, we forged an agreement sealed in blood. Cody brought the beer, I brought the whiteboard. We met like two exiles in my garage, trading scars from past battles. The air was thick with WD-40 and icy betrayal. Cody's eyes, sunken from months of Ethan's oppression, held a smoldering fire beneath a veil of shock. All it needed was a spark. I handed him my phone. Read this, I hissed. On the screen, a screenshot from Discord, one that Ethan had hastily deleted, but too late. I had intercepted it. Ethan thought it was hilarious. He wrote, "If this little team had even half the brains I pretend they have in investor meetings, I wouldn't have to mess with their code like I'm changing dirty diapers." Cody stared at the text as if it were a suicide note written in his own blood. He looked up, his eyes blazing with fury. "We're not just leaving," he growled, clenching his fists. "We're going to rip out his guts." And we started sketching out Frameshift, the modular developer platform Ethan had rejected as not sexy enough for venture capitalists. We knew it worked like a beast. Half of our internal tools already ran on its unfinished code. It's just that Ethan was so far removed from programming, he couldn't read it if it were tattooed on his favorite exercise bike. I had a list of chosen ones. Quiet geniuses Ethan didn't see because he was too busy drooling over trendy bloggers and threatening to replace everyone with neural networks. Ashley from QA, a humble genius whose promotion had been delayed 3 times. Jordan from Data, who hadn't taken a vacation in 2 years because Ethan needed someone maniacally dedicated. Riley from UX. Ethan once called her hysterical just for suggesting that the new user onboarding process shouldn't feel like torture. One by one, we reached out to them. Always in person, always after work, always with the same offer. "Remember that thing you built that Ethan took credit for? Want to do it again without him?" Some refused. One even ran to Ethan to complain. We found out when Ethan screamed across the room during the next morning's stand-up, "If anyone here is dreaming of working at another company, tell me to my face." His face was red, his fists clenched, and his eyes darted around. He was clearly on edge. That day, I saw his true face, fear. And there's no scent sweeter than the smell of sweat seeping through a tyrant's hypocritical smile. But fear drives fools to recklessness, and Ethan was in its grip. Less than a week later, he called an emergency meeting. He herded the whole team into the stuffy cafeteria and, like a preacher, stood before a screen with a single word emblazoned on it: loyalty. No charts, no development plans, just a 10-minute tirade about parasites sucking the blood of creators. Then he uttered the phrase that ripped off all the masks: "Anyone who leaves now will bitterly regret it when they crawl back in 6 months begging for a job." That quote will echo on the pages of TechRadar, but for now, it's just the harbinger of a storm. That night, Ashley sent me a 3-word message: "I'm in." Riley followed, then Jordan. Ethan suspected nothing. He was too busy rehearsing his grandiose speech about fearless leadership in the mirror. He didn't know that we were building Frameshift nights and weekends against his will. He didn't know that our investor meeting was scheduled with the very person he'd brazenly ignored after stealing his presentation. And he certainly didn't know that his birthday was circled in red on our wall, like a sacred day of reckoning. The day our startup would take off. The day his empire would crumble, bleeding out. The day I, without flinching, would smile and send it all live. Have you ever seen a man gleefully watch his own demise? We have. Through binoculars. From the coffee shop across the street, on the 2nd floor, where Ethan forbade us from going during work hours. Through the ice in our cold brew, we watched the office lights flicker like a dying star. It was launch day. Our launch day. Ethan didn't know it yet. He's in there, cutting that bland cake his assistant ordered. He seems to like the color red. Probably giving a speech about corporate culture while the frosting bleeds onto his keyboard. And here, on our side of the street, the moment of truth has arrived. I hit publish on Product Hunt. The send button on the investor email. Riley blasted our teaser on Facebook, adding the line, "Made by the people who actually built their last creation." And it began. The first signal, from Ashley. Ethan just saw it. Froze with a piece of cake in his hand. Jordan didn't let up. He tried to slam his laptop shut, but the Bluetooth speaker kept blasting his own press conference. The sound echoed throughout the floor like mockery. We weren't engaging in petty pranks. We were surgeons, and Ethan was our tumor. You can't just abandon someone like that. You have to cut him out, excise him to the last cell, without anesthesia, without pity. He built his career by parasitizing other people's ideas, passing them off as his own genius insights. And now, we were going to show the world what happens when the brains leave their host. But let me tell you how we got to this point, because murder isn't just an act, it's a whole story. First, you have to forge your knife. 3 weeks prior, we secured funding. Not from venture capital, that would have attracted too much attention early on. No, we went the old-fashioned route. An angel investor, anonymity, crypto backing, a bridge round. Good old Cody, Dominic, who made a fortune shorting Ethan's first startup that collapsed under the weight of scandals and NDAs. Dominic had only one condition: I want to see the look on his face when it all goes to hell. We wove our web in the shadows, like fugitives, our fingers like dancers tracing Arabic symbols of code. Dawn stand-ups, like clandestine meetings, burner phones, VPNs stacked like matryoshka dolls, our shield from prying eyes. We engineered onboarding with meticulous precision, like a guided missile, elegant, seamless, captivating. Ashley, like a ghost, coded every corner, erasing traces as if from a crime scene. And the product came to life. Fast, lean, powerful. Frameshift became everything Ethan's company had only vainly tried to appear. Then, a week before the triumphant launch, I committed an act, foolish or brilliant, I can't say. Depends on your poison of choice. I walked into Ethan's office. He was alone, the door open, and on the screen a motivational video where The Rock, veins bulging, proclaimed dominance. I froze in the doorway and smirked, asking, "Ever wonder what you'd do if your entire team just vanished?" He blinked, as if he didn't understand the language I was speaking. "They're not going anywhere. I created them." I just smiled, a slight upturn of the corners of my lips. That's what they said about the Titanic. And, without waiting for an answer, I turned and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. That fateful night, he sent a bombastic message to the entire company titled Unwavering Loyalty. And the next morning, HR was flooded with resignation letters, 3 of them, each with a concise note: "Thanks for the lessons." Ethan was silent. Deep down, he probably felt the countdown had begun. He just didn't know we'd timed the explosion for his birthday, to the hour, to the minute. After all, when building fireproof walls, Ethan, you forget that the fire sometimes starts within. But the first sign wasn't the resignations. It was the silence. An icy, ominous silence. Ethan didn't barge into the office, turning purple with rage. He didn't erupt in a Discord tirade, didn't spew a stream of capital letters. No venomous allusions to loyalty in company-wide emails. No one was summoned to his war room for an inspiring, gladiator-esque speech. He simply vanished for 36 hours. Complete, all-consuming silence. No one saw him leave. No one saw him return. The lights in his office burned all night, like a flickering tomb behind frosted glass. Whispers claimed he was calling investors, trying to save a sinking ship. Others swore he was frantically scrubbing his Facebook, erasing compromising material. I could swear I heard him crying. I believe it, with every fiber of my being. I've seen enough like Ethan, whose ego's shattered against the rocks of reality. But that's not the end, not by a long shot. Launch day is just a bright flash, a firework before the real explosion. Remember that CRM system I cobbled together in a fever of sleepless nights, the one Ethan so proudly touted to the board at quarterly presentations? Yeah, that was my work. Built on a prototype I deliberately didn't commit to the corporate repository. Why? Because Ethan had a nasty habit: he'd steal other people's work and put his name on the patent applications. So I developed it modularly, in pieces, encrypted, convoluted, linking everything through my personal server, through an API Ethan didn't even bother to audit. And so, 2 days after Frameshift's triumphant launch, the CRM system crashed. A terrible, devastating crash. Half the client dashboards went dark, like stars swallowed by a black hole. Data streams froze, encased in ice. Retention rates plummeted, like a body thrown off a bridge into cold water. Their most prized catch, that pompous logistics corporation Ethan never stopped bragging about, declared a critical situation. Meanwhile, our valiant support, in the form of Jordan in pajama pants, was onboarding those very clients to frame shift via online chat. Ethan, of course, tried to manage the situation. With fanfare, as always. He called an emergency meeting. Everyone connected, cameras off, but you could feel the tension gripping their faces. He began his speech. "We're experiencing a period of temporary technical turbulence, but now, more than ever, loyalty is paramount." And then Ashley, bless her heart, turned on the microphone and sarcastically drawled, "Loyalty, like crediting Riley for the interface she designed? Or loyalty, like erasing my name from the beta presentation because investors don't trust modest women?" With those words, she left the conference. 3 more followed her. It was a mutiny. Slow, quiet, but deadly accurate. But Ethan, in his complacency, hadn't yet grasped the depth of the wound inflicted. And that's where it gets interesting. While Ethan was losing sleep, tallying up the losses from fleeing clients and licking his internal wounds, we were secretly preparing for our first public demonstration of frame shift. And where? At a tech conference that Ethan himself, ironically, was attending. And guess who was the main sponsor of the main stage? I was. Cody walked onto the stage. He was wearing that same hoodie that Ethan used to mock, calling it unprofessional. The room froze in bewilderment and then erupted in a hum. At that moment, the screen behind Cody lit up, and the phrase appeared in crystal-clear white font: "What happens when builders refuse to build for bullies?" A ringing silence fell. And then the thunder struck. A video started playing. User testimonials poured in from those who had fled Ethan's platform. A feature comparison, presented in clear graphs, elicited laughter at first, then thunderous applause from the room. Ethan thought it all belonged to him. He wasn't in the room, but I got a message from someone watching him from the wings: "He's just petrified, white as a sheet." His badge fell out of his hands. Not a word from Ethan. Not that day, not the next. But I knew the storm was inevitable. A message, a meltdown, a desperate attempt to regain power he no longer had. When it happened, it wasn't a battle, but more like a death rattle. One private message. One line, full of pain and incomprehension: "Why?" I typed and immediately deleted probably 14 different answers. In the end, I settled on the truth, typing just one phrase: "Because you thought we were furniture." Turns out, we were the foundation. On Tuesday, retribution arrived. Certified mail. 3 thick envelopes, filled with malice and despair. Lawsuits. Ethan had chosen the path of vengeance rather than recovery. When power slips through one's fingers, a person rarely seeks reasons. They desperately grab at anything sharp within reach, just to hold on. Ethan unleashed a barrage of accusations against us: intellectual property theft, breach of non-compete agreement, defamation, sabotage. The entire arsenal of legal options was thrown into battle. He even tried to hold me accountable for emotional disruption of company morale. That point almost made me laugh. But I held back. While he was, like a madman, tearing himself apart with legal battles, I was preparing to speak at the Techstars conference. In the room were investors, startup founders, journalists, now our audience. The panel topic was like a sentence: toxic founders and talent drain, building after burnout. I didn't name names. Nor was there any need. A murmur rose in the room when I said, "We created Frame Shift not to destroy technology. We did it because we were tired of building temples for those who desecrate sanctuaries." Immediately after the presentation, my phone received a message. Number blocked, name unknown, just one word: stop. I immediately recognized Ethan's handwriting, every letter felt his trembling. But the game wasn't over yet. The thing is, Ethan never saw the cracks in the walls until the ceiling collapsed on his head. He naively believed that the lawsuits would scare us. But Dominic had already assembled a team of lawyer sharks, the kind who sip espresso with an icy smile while sending cease and desist letters. We weren't just defending ourselves, we were going on the offensive. It turned out that Riley had wisely saved copies of Ethan's Discord archives since learning how to delete them permanently. They contained all his chats, where he cynically mocked diverse hiring policies and discussed replacing anyone who became too expensive. Ashley had screenshots proving blatant salary discrepancies. Engineers were promised raises that never materialized. Bonuses were cut to fund Ethan's maniacal passion for branded merchandise. And I had the audio. I remember one night, a couple of months before I left, Ethan pinned me against the wall in the hallway after a binge with the board of directors. His speech was slurred as he hissed in my face, "I keep people around just long enough to suck all their best ideas out of them, got it?" His eyes burned with an unhealthy fire, and his voice held an undisguised threat. And then, I just replace them with kids who will work for options instead of salary. It's called leverage, baby. That phrase, recorded by my phone, hung in the air like a sentence. When our lawyer played the recording, the room fell into such silence that you could hear a pin drop. Ethan didn't move. Not a glance, not a word, not a single blink. Just a stone statue. His lawyer, clearing his throat, timidly suggested a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Dominic leaned forward, flashed a dazzling smile, and said, "No NDAs for those who abuse their power." Not this time. We walked out of the courtroom with our heads held high, feeling absolutely vindicated. 2 days later, Ethan announced his personal leave on Facebook. And a week after that, his company's website went into maintenance mode. And that's where things get interesting. Remember that intern Ethan drove to tears over a synergistic typo on a slide? She's our new head of public relations now. Her debut blog post on Frameshift, titled "Burnout Isn't a Badge of Honor, It's a Warning," blew up the internet. It trended on Stack Overflow, Wired picked it up. While the world applauded justice, Ethan's belated birthday post, yes, he actually posted it, hung alone in the digital ether, like a tombstone for his reputation. A lonely candle flickered in the digital void, 0 likes. The caption, like a challenge, read, "Built to last." Beneath the post lay a barren wasteland of comments, broken only by a single message. A reply from our company's official account. "Happy birthday, Ethan. Thanks for the lessons learned." Attached was a screenshot of our dashboard, showcasing the explosive growth of active users in real time. We didn't need to destroy him. We just needed to outlive his triumph. The truth is, public failures leave an indelible mark. Weeks after our triumphant product launch and Ethan's mysterious Facebook disappearance, we began receiving messages from inside his company. Or what was left of it, to be precise. Timid greetings from burnt-out project managers. Late-night DMs from junior developers who once swore they'd stand by him to the end. Survivors, those Ethan hadn't noticed in his hubris, or had noticed but ruthlessly discarded. They weren't asking for jobs. They were sending screenshots, meeting recordings, slashed budgets, an internal memo from Ethan's interim CEO that began ominously, "We are entering a recalibration phase." They were gutting the company, cutting budgets, rescinding perks, shutting down projects. Even internal Discord channels were vanishing into thin air, as if they never existed. It wasn't the collapse of an empire, but rather a desperate attempt to survive by sacrificing parts of itself to save the whole. A cold, sterile panic hung in the air, especially palpable in the grandiose investor relations suites. I was sitting in a hotel bar in Austin when a message arrived on my phone. Number masked, just an attachment. A PDF. Ethan's severance agreement. Plain as day, voluntary resignation with reduced severance and draconian non-disclosure terms. They'd gotten rid of him before he could embarrass the board again. And here's the cherry on top of this cruel but just story. The signature at the bottom, not Ethan's. The signature of the chairwoman of the board, the same woman Ethan once dismissively called a quota-filling empty suit. My beer never tasted so good. But you crave the climax, don't you? You want a scene that doesn't just sting, but leaves an indelible scar in the memory. It happened 3 days later. Tech Summit, the conference Ethan was so proud of, considered his domain. This year, we weren't just attending. We were leading a founders' roundtable. Cody was scheduled to speak. I wasn't. I intended to remain in the shadows, behind the scenes of this drama, but my gaze picked him out in the crowd. Baseball cap pulled low, hoodie traitorously obscuring his face, sunglasses, a pathetic attempt to hide from his own shame. He stood there, during our triumphant presentation, like a shadow, ready to dissolve into the carpet, still pretending to scout for new talent. But we knew the truth. His jaw clenched as demo reels started flashing across the massive screens. I couldn't miss this moment. I approached him, anticipating the resolution of this spectacle. He didn't respond, just stared fixedly at the screen, where a glowing customer testimonial was playing. A VP from a giant fintech corporation was enthusiastically describing how FrameShift had saved them 3 months of development and $250,000 in bloated headcount. Ethan whispered, almost spat, "You stole this." I smiled, genuinely and calmly, "I saved it." He looked at me as if he were watching his own soul leave his body. There was raw terror in his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt neither anger nor even gloating. Just clarity. A final understanding of everything that had happened. He took a step forward, as if wanting to say something, to justify himself, perhaps even to threaten. But he froze, as if struck by paralysis. He turned and disappeared into the crowd, dissolving like a nightmare in the rays of the rising sun. That night, instead of Cody, I took the stage. I told a story. A story without names, but full of juicy, damning details. A story of betrayal and redemption. A story everyone understood. I told this story to every intern choking back tears in a locked cubicle, every developer whose confidence was trampled on in private, every talent buried under a mountain of someone else's ego. And I ended with a phrase that slipped out: some founders build companies, others build cages. The room froze, as if time had stopped. And then a storm of applause erupted. And somewhere in there, I knew Ethan heard every clap. Because silence screams loudest when it follows your name. Ethan didn't disappear, no. He started to rot from the inside. Just a couple of weeks after the summit, rumors began to spread. The night shifts at X, Twitter, were flooded with his defenders, shouting about us as opportunists, traitors who stole his brilliant vision. His poisonous handwriting was everywhere. The same phrases he used to poison us in the war rooms, the same twisted logic he fed to terrified interns. At first, we brushed it off, but then he rolled out a post on Blogspot called "When Founders Get Screwed," 6,000 words of sanctimonious garbage, a story of theft, betrayal, and his heroic start from scratch. He didn't even bother to name us, the cowardly rat. Now his cowardice reeked of expensive lawyer perfume, but his dirty fingerprints were all over it. He painted himself as a martyr, claiming he mentored these ungrateful upstarts, risked everything for their broken talents, and in the end, got a knife in the back from their inflated egos. Disgusting. And, damn it, it almost worked. The comments flooded in like a burst pipe, contradictory, but deafeningly loud. Loyal sycophants crawled out of their holes to defend their idol. Battles raged on Dig, spawning insane theories, seasoned with hypocritical sympathetic sighs in the style of "What a journey" from these startup bros, ready to sell their souls for a blue checkmark and a podcast microphone. But he made a fatal mistake. He put that very quote in the epigraph of his post. The phrase he said to me personally, in that very hallway. Drunk as a skunk and smug as a peacock. I don't invest in people. I invest in ideas that I can steal down to the last word. And we, had a recording. Dominic called me that night. His voice, steel. "Want to end this shit?" he asked. "What's the price?" I replied. He smirked, "Nothing we haven't already paid." And we dropped the bomb. The exposé wasn't just a line in the news, not just a routine denial. It was a punch to the gut, 22 minutes of furious truth, posted on the channel of daring rookie journalists with a million-strong audience and a personal dislike for toxic founders. We laid all our cards on the table. Voicemails, Discord screenshots, blatant salary disparities, revelations from former employees who finally dared to speak out. It was calculated, precise, ruthless. The title of the film hit the bullseye, the startup that ate itself from the inside. On Monday, the explosion thundered. On Tuesday, Ethan's name became synonymous with shame on Twitter's trending topics. On Wednesday, he was struck from the list of speakers at conferences. By Friday, his name was erased from the corporate honor roll of his own company. And on Saturday, he wrote to me. Not a shadow of his former bravado, not a hint of threats. Just a pathetic, forced message, I fucked up. Maybe we can talk? I stared at the screen, mesmerized, for a full 10 minutes. Then I typed back, fucking up is when you spill coffee. You've been stoking the fires of hatred for years. Burn alone. And I blocked his number. No triumphant cries, no hand-wringing. Just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that falls on a person like a wet rope tightening around their neck. And here it is, the triumphant launch of Frameshift's V2. A full-fledged version, serverless architecture, automation, the very dream that Ethan contemptuously called niche. Customers were ecstatic, investors were blowing up our phones. But you know what really lit me up? Not the rave reviews, not the money, not even the newspaper headlines. But the radiant Ashley, who Ethan once silenced in meetings, now confidently leading our meetings, smashing that damn glass ceiling to smithereens. It's when Riley was stopped after a developers meeting and told, listen, your adaptation made me feel like a human being again. It's a team laughing, creating, breathing freely, without a shadow of fear. We stopped being rebels. We became creators again. I thought revenge would burn like fire. But no. It turned out to be a breath of freedom, slow, well-deserved, undeniable. Ethan didn't just disappear from the industry like some haunting ghost, but more like a stubborn stain scrubbed from the face of history. His X account locked down tighter than a drum. His startup's website was swallowed whole by some bland competitor, leaving behind only a skeletal husk and torching his name in the process. Rumor had it he tried his hand at consulting. Didn't last long, just a couple of months. People whispered about it behind closed doors, they always know everything, but none of us reveled in his downfall. We didn't need to. Instead, we threw a party to celebrate closing our series of funding round for Frameshift. No stuffy venture capital schmoozing, just us, our team. The ones who'd sweated and bled, building the company brick by brick. Ashley brought the good whiskey. Cody was back there, channeling some kind of sacred ritual over the grilled cheeses. Riley hacked the karaoke system and put it on a constant loop of early 2000s pop-punk. Somewhere between the third chorus of Mr. Brightside and Jordan's Drunken Dancing, seemingly oblivious to the fact that someone forgot to tell him to turn off the microphone, I slipped outside. My phone was blowing up with congratulatory messages, business proposals, press inquiries, but I ignored them all, just stared up at the night sky, soaking in the sounds of the laughter we had created. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning for the future. Not bracing for another dose of snide remarks on Slack. Not wondering if I'd get stabbed in the back for a debt. We hadn't just built a company. We had built an actual oasis of safety and support. And yeah, Ethan's still out there somewhere. Maybe he's scribbling away at another manifesto. Maybe he's hawking some kind of grit course for struggling startups. Maybe he glances back at that very dashboard we got him for his birthday, where our user count just keeps climbing and climbing, like some silent triumph. But it doesn't matter anymore. The micromanager who once smugly declared, "No one ever leaves me," has become a cautionary footnote in the story we tell the interns over beers. And us? We keep building, laughing, living.